in general, like some of us are here for plot, some of us aren't, and you know what? Respect on both sides.
Hi everyone, welcome to Lovecast the BL podcast. I'm your host Heather, and with me are your other hosts Pixie and Alexa.
Hello.
So today on the show, we've invited some very talented people to talk all about BL fan fiction. So please give a very warm welcome to Kayla, Key, Tabby, Yulia, Laura, and B, also known as Seeking Moonscapes, Kira Nakira, Tirayu, Two Moon, Lorelai, and Alewa on AO3. Woo! Welcome! My goodness, that was a mouthful. And I feel like I spoke very quickly, so we're definitely going to need the subs for everyone to just keep up with what I'm saying. But welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Oh, no, that's not what I was meant to say. Apologies. Thank you for joining us today, guys. I think it would be really fun if we kind of started today's episode with a little self-introduction from all of you. So maybe you can tell the listeners what fan fiction you like to write, maybe like which fics you are either best known for, or any fics that you would recommend people starting with to kind of get into your work. So how about we start? I'm going to start with who I can see on my screen first, which is Key.
Hello. Okay, so I'm known for, it's funny, when I started writing Win Team fanfiction, I actually started with a vibe of like, I would like to write sweet, cuddly, domestic, established relationship fic, which is primarily what I do. Unfortunately, I happened to drop a mountain on Win in my first fic.
And we've never forgiven you.
And now it's like kind of what I'm known for, which is fair.
It's nice.
But yeah. And then I also kind of hit him with a bus. So
Why not?
a double decker too. So it wasn't just like a normal bus. I couldn't be cool about it. I had to like
add the double decker. Add the extra layer.
I did have a comment at one point where they were like, should he be alive? And I was like, do you want me to kill him? And they were like, no, it's fine. It's fine. Question your disbelief. It's okay. Like, maybe we don't question the things that I drop on my son. So I think the fic I'm known for is Muse, which is something I didn't intend to be as long as it is. I think it's 140,000 words. I thought it was going to be maybe 20,000. I think in my first author's note in the first chapter, I was like, this will probably be 30,000. I have faith in myself for some reason. I don't know where that came from. And then it just kind of kept going. I did kind of shoot myself in the foot because between every chapter, it's all from Team's perspective, but in between every chapter, I did an interlude of different characters' POV, just to like expand on the world building a bit, because he's got a very limited connection into this world of sex work. And like, I wanted it to be as fleshed out as possible. So, but that meant I had to write one between every chapter. And that meant that the story, so it's technically 20 chapters long, but with the interludes, it's 40. So I did that to myself. I have no one to blame. Sorry. Shouldn't have put that there. So I guess I would recommend starting with that one, even though it's really intimidating, and that's probably a bad idea. I changed my mind. Don't start with that. That's really long and really unwise to recommend to people. I would recommend the one where I drop Mountain on Win. Start with that one. And everything after that is great, and like you're not going to suffer as much after that.
Start with the suffering and then just let it get better.
Yeah, because then all the fics where it's like, oh, Team has a cold. Like, that's you're totally
right. Pales in comparison.
Right? Like, oh, Team almost drowned. Whatever. You've seen that in the show. Fine.
Okay. Awesome. Well, welcome to Lovecast.
Glad to have started this off on a beautiful hinge. The torturer. Moving on.
Tabby, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tabby. I primarily write Win Team fanfic. Um, it the brain rot has been real ever since I watched Until We Meet Again. They're just kind of stuck in there now. I think maybe the fic I would recommend people start with is I Got My Pride, which is winning
Yes.
team going to Pride. Yeah, I like that fic. I think that's a good one to start with.
Me too.
Love. All right, Kayla.
Yeah. So you're gonna find me in the bad buddy tags of AO3. Like, I live there. I went in there several years ago and I have not come out for anything else. Yeah, Pat Pran, they are my life. I'm still writing fanfiction for them constantly to this day. I can't stop. No, literally help.
This is an intervention, and
yeah, obviously. Yeah, the fic I'm probably best known for is the fine line between hormones and home. Usually, just I call it the fine line because it's easier. And that is a very, very hinged, cuddly, very cute, wholesome fic, which does not involve ridiculous amounts of very raunchy smut scenes whatsoever, and also was not supposed to be as long as it is, so I understand your pain, Keith, so well.
Outlining is
and it was just, yeah, you know, it just started out as this sort of idea of let's subvert some tropes because that's what Pat Pran do. And what's the biggest trope in fanfiction? Well, Omegaverse, which I don't even read. And then I wrote 160,000 words. And now I'm famous. Omegaverse writer. But I also did that to myself, so yeah. It's probably not the one that I would recommend people necessarily start with, for the similar reasons that Key has is very intimidating. It's big. It's there's a lot going on in there. I think in terms of things maybe to start with, I think the fic that I first became like sort of well known in the fandom for was A Soft Boy in Soft Sweaters, which was based on me noticing that Pran was just always in soft clothing. So he had this kind of hard exterior, but he was always put in something soft. And I think that was meant to kind of be a play on the character, and like he's a bit of a marshmallow inside sort of thing. But it kind of turned into this thing like, what if he was always wearing soft things because Pat is a very tactile person? And it would make Pat touch him. And so that kind of just turned into a sort of cute little one-shot story. I think that's a nice one to start with because that kind of gives you an idea about my sort of Pat Pram versions. Yeah.
Nice. Love that. Laura.
Yeah, hi, I'm Laura. Thanks for having me. I'd say my thing is like very long and elaborate AUs, which I absolutely love to write. I just like the idea of taking the characters that I really love and putting them in a completely different situation and creating a story that is almost original, but still kind of feels like coming home, you know, because you know the characters, you know the setting, you can play with a bit of, you know, symbols and visuals from the show that people will be familiar with. But it's still something completely different. I think my most well-known fic is probably my long Danyok AU, which is called Gampus Coffee Workshop, which is a coffee shop AU, but it's also very political. Like it deals with gentrification and basically Yok experiencing a lot of different forms of activism and then kind of finding his own way as an activist. And this story honestly means a lot to me, but like you guys already said, it's very long. So it's 420,000 words. So maybe don't take on this. I actually have a Pat Pran fic that I would probably recommend because I think stylistically, it's probably a good way to get to know me, and it's called The Way a Lover Holds His Heart, which I actually wrote rather quickly and never expected to get such a good positive response. But I really like this fic, and like I said, I think stylistically this is very me, the way it is written and structured. So yeah, I would recommend this. It's a bit short. It's like 7,000 words. You can do that in a day.
You do that in a night. Bedtime reading.
Yeah.
Actually, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Julia.
So I'm Julia. I write as Tumon in the BL fandom space. And I think I'm like, compared to everyone that has spoken so far, I'm not very loyal because I write along a lot of very different TV series. Just I don't stay in one place for too long. But what I like to write is canon divergent fics or canon compliant fics. So for me, it's very much staying near the original storyline and finding spaces where I can fit my own narrative in. Just either plaster fixing things I don't like, or just warming my way in and trying to figure out, just going from the characters, what could happen here. And I think I'm probably most well known for my Kin Porsche fics. Either Safe, which was a fic about Tankun slapping Kin around after episode 4. Or also my Vegas Pete fics. But I think I would recommend my fic Terror in the Resonance. Because it really showcases what I said before, that terror is really about trying to figure out how Todd Black, the very brainworm ship, I think that affected a lot of us and not me. I was really trying to figure out how these two people could actually work in post-canon, because they had just this storm of emotions in the original storyline, and I wanted to figure out, okay, what do I have to do to make these two people work? And I think that's the essence of what I try to do. Like, what do I have to do to make these two people work?
I love that. B, do you want to share as well?
Sure. I represent the Struggle Street Writer, where I've started about 50,000 things, but I actually only have one, soon to be 2, published on AO3.
Yay!
My first one is just a little Win Team fic that's pretty much just self-indulgent fluff. But shout out to Key for all the exchanges she runs. My next fic is a Be My Favorite fic, so that will be also pretty awesome. Yeah. I consume far more fan fiction than I write, but it's fun. I like doing it.
Yeah, definitely. Nice. Do we at Lovecast want to share what fics we gravitate towards?
I feel like these days, especially with like in terms of fandom, okay, so lately confession, I've not always been a huge fanfic person. I was like back in like I used to read and write a lot of Justin Bieber fan fiction, but that's a totally different time period in my life. So since I got into BL, I only recently, I think, started reading a lot more fanfic, and that came because of My School President. So after finishing My School President, I just needed like all the post finale like Tin Gun feels. So I still read a lot of My School President, and I read a lot of Heart and Leeming Moonlight Chicken fic after that finished. And lately I've been kind of living in the Last Twilight Fix-It fic sphere. So that's like the main stuff I've been reading as of late.
Yeah. So in BL fandom space, the only thing like I gravitate towards Win Team, and Ram King.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not loyal. I like lots of things all of the time, but I kind of gravitate to, I don't know, I latch onto a fic, and then if that fic has really drawn me in, then I start to read more of that couple. But
Yeah.
if another fic kind of grabs my attention, I leave that couple behind and I just follow the little rabbit hole through again.
You hussy.
Yeah, a little bit. But the fics that I do kind of, or the couples that I do tend to kind of come back to, I guess, are Pat Pran, who else? Kawi P, and Win Team. Sometimes it's got to be a good fic though. Like, I'm a bit picky with my Win Team. And then there's one else. Who was it? There's someone. Kim Porsche. There's been a couple of Kim Porsche that have grabbed my attention. But yeah, I'm usually in the like Pat Pran, Kawi P sort of universe, and that's kind of where I've been for the past X amount of time. Yeah. I just can't let go, guys.
I will say I also gravitate towards more spicy. I've always, like, since I started reading fanfiction, I always just gravitated
Just in general.
towards the spicy end of
Yeah.
She
it.
just needs the spice.
I know Alexa likes the fluff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I love
Yeah.
good fluff. I love a good AU. The coffee shop AUs are always my favorite. I like university AUs a lot of the time, so I like the softer side of things. Fluff,
Yeah.
fluff, fluff.
Definitely. Alrighty. Well, before we jump into, I guess, kind of like the meat of the episode, all of our discussion questions and everything, I wanted to begin, like, so I don't think that people coming to this episode are not going to know what fanfic is, but if they don't, I kind of wanted to begin with, like, just a very basic level, I guess, sort of definition of what fanfic is. So in the most simplest of definitions, fanfiction is fiction written by a fan of and featuring characters from a particular TV series or film. And you can also find fanfic written about real people, actors, singers, band members. You can find fanfic written about pretty much anything, I guess, within pop culture space, regardless of what country you're from. There's going to be some form of fanfic about it. So I think that that's pretty much the most simplest way I can explain fanfic, or like in its general terms. And fanfic can take shape in so many different ways, I guess. Like, we've got AO3, which is like, can be novels, can be one-shots, but that's in the written form. Then you've got things like on Twitter, you've got your threads, your AUs, all that type of stuff there. You've got people make like visual sort of fanfic stuff on YouTube, audio. Like, there's so many different versions of fanfic. And then I was also kind of like, I tried to pinpoint exactly when fanfic, I guess, started, and I couldn't pinpoint exactly, but I could pinpoint when it kind of became what we know fanfic to be today, and that was back in the 60s. It came to be in the Star Trek fandom, funnily enough, in the 60s, with fans creating fanzines for distribution amongst themselves. And that was mainly women of the Star Trek fandom were creating these fanzines and distributing it. And within those fanzines, there was fanfiction written. And then with the rise of technology and the internet, fanfic was taken online and it's developed into what I was just saying today. All these different types of fanfic that we love to, I guess, enjoy and create and live our lives in, if I'm going to be honest, because I read fanfic like at least once a day. I literally live my life in fanfic.
Yeah. And a lot of like the authors that we see that have books out now, like original work, they started off as fanfiction writers. And if we go to the Thai BL world, like Bam Bam, who wrote Cutie Pie, she was telling us about how they started out just writing on
like
paper,
passing it
and they would
around.
like exchange them in between like underground BL fan fiction, which is crazy to think about because that was 10 years ago, and look where Thai BL is now.
It's amazing, absolutely amazing how quick the growth is as well.
And then you've got your Thai BLs that were fan fiction before they were adapted, like Nitty Man and Not Me.
Not Me, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
The K-pop
so I feel
fanfic to
like
Thai BL pipeline.
I feel like this is like the perfect place to start one of our discussion questions. Like, what is the role of fanfic in fandom? Like, does anyone want to jump in on that discussion point?
I think it really is the potential. It's like the potential energy for fandom, where a lot of the time fanfic exists because you have the canon that you've been given, and you might be either unsatisfied with it and want to make it better, or you might be so excited about it you want to contribute to it. And so in a lot of fandom spaces, fanfic is there as like the potential that can be created with the source material.
Yeah.
Also, in terms of like, oops, sorry,
No, continue.
rock paper scissors.
No, you go ahead. That's fine.
Well, so in terms of like, for those of us who are from an era when queer media wasn't as prevalent, fiction was, you know, kind of our only way to be seen in a lot of our shows that we were watching. So like, I started writing fan fiction when I was about 9, back in the days when fanfiction.net was all we had.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like I think fanfiction was kind of the first community I really had, and at the age of 9 too, right? Like this idea that like, and plus the internet was a very different place back then. But the idea that like you could, my first fanfiction was for Animorphs, because the Rachel Tobias thing was taking so fucking long. And I like that book series is like 80 something books, and I lost patience around book 10. Like I was like, wrap this shit up. You're in love. Both know it. So like,
You gotta keep this shit going.
right? I'm like, just say it, and then date, and then write a bunch of books about fighting aliens, but you're in love about it also. So I was a very passionate 9-year-old. So like but I'd never thought about like writing it. So I was just sort of like on GeoCities, just like Animorphs, because the next book hadn't come out yet. And like 9-year-old fuming anger, just like, why isn't my ship together? And then I saw fanfiction on someone's like Angel Fire GeoCities site, and I was like, you can do that? Oh my god, that's the only thing I'm ever gonna do now. And now, time later, that's like it turned into also just like being a fledgling queer child, like not realizing that I was like, there were I mean, Rachel and Tobias is very queer coded. So, but like moving past that, whenever I'd watch a TV show, I'd always be drawn to like the same gendered characters, like in their bonds with each other. And there's a whole conversation to be had about why. I mean, there's like women in fiction can be very underwritten and very skeleton bones written, and like creators will unknowingly give more fleshed out relationships between male characters, and female characters won't talk to each other, and that's a whole other thing. But it was nice to like get to know queer people in this community, and like it's a very loving community in some ways, sometimes in some places. But again, the potential for love is there if we foster it and hold hands and don't fight each other.
Very cute. I wanted to, I think, say a bit more about what we said before, that fandom kind of often exists in the margins, right? Like you have your text basically, and a lot of fandom, fan theories, fanfic, also fan art sometimes kind of fills in the gaps that the actual media cannot give us sometimes. Like Alexa, you like to read a lot of fluff fic, for example, and oftentimes a show, has to follow a narrative. It doesn't have time to give you these moments, and I think that's what fanfic often does for the fans, that it can give you something that the media that you love so much and that you've connected with so much cannot provide for you. I think that's the beauty of it. Like, we all have our brain worms, as Heather said, and we can, make them real and share them with others.
Especially,
So I'd like to. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. Very quickly, I love the fact that you bring that up, just because, like, the Kawipi fic that you've written, the where it's like so Laura wrote a fic where I won't shut up about it because it's the best thing in the world. And I love it. It's an AU that took the characters Kui and Pisang from Be My Favorite and made them into basically an adaptation of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And it's one of the brilliantest things ever. To the point where, like, as I was reading, I started to forget what the actual canon of the show is. This was the show. This was the show we all watched. And, like, the fact that, like, we have that ability to just sort of, like, take our dolls and put them in another dream house and make a whole other world.
It's like playing Barbie, but like someone else has to perceive it.
Yeah, Barbie with guns.
And it's like,
sorry,
it's like your favorite. Sorry.
So I'd like to jump in on something Heather said, actually. When you said that you read a fic that you really like and then you start liking the couple, I think that's a big draw because fandoms with a lot of fanfic or fanfic that's very good and prolific will draw people into reading or watching the original text. And I think that's what fanfic does. It extends the shelf life of the fandom in some very important ways. And that, I think, is a very good, like a very big contribution that fanfiction writers do who make the fandom.
It's also kind of where I know a lot of people who will read fic in a fandom without ever engaging with the source material in the first place. Because it's just they're getting emotional needs met through the fic as well. And that's something where like Pixie said that she likes reading Ram King fic, and with the prevalence of Win Team fic from Until We Meet Again, it's where your emotional needs aren't being met by the show. You can have it met through fic because you're getting satisfaction.
Yeah. I also think it's
and I mean, like, with
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think it's when it's like your favorite characters and you're already so heavily invested, and then there's people that for free are just writing novel length plus stories about these characters. Like, of course, it's going to kind of bring an extra energy into the fandom and kind of sometimes revitalizes it and stuff.
Yeah, we kept Win Team fandom going for 2 years, 2.5 years, with like 37 minutes of time. And it was 37 minutes. I made a spreadsheet. I had a lot of time in the pandemic.
This fandom is such a good example for what Julia said, that you can maintain a fandom just through fan work and fanfic, because like you didn't have a lot of actual content to work with, but people stayed around for this pairing for so many years, waiting for this show to happen, just based on fan works, right? I think that's pretty amazing, actually.
I think like my obsession with Ram King is like, okay, I got it from the show and I read the novel, and after reading the novel, it was like, no, this is not it. This is really, there has to be something better. This is not it. So I got like what I needed since the show ended and you sort of didn't get a closure for Ram King. Like, there is more to the story. I had to get that through fanfiction because the books just bulldozed the story, the characters.
I think as well, fandom has this amazing ability of allowing you to really go into the universe a lot deeper than you can through canon, because obviously stories have, as someone else said earlier, like it has a narrative it has to stay with, and so fandom allows you to just open that up into an entire universe.
Yeah.
And it does allow you to, you have those canon compliant fics like Ilya likes to write, where you can really play with, well, what's actually happening in that scene? Like, what is going on inside the characters' minds? How does that scene link into the other things and have an effect? But also then to crack it open into divergencies, what ifs, if that hadn't have happened, what could have happened instead? And I think as people, we're always fascinated by what ifs, right? Even in our own lives. I'm sure you've all had moments where you thought, what if I'd done that instead of this? What would my life be like today? And I think fandom allows you to do that, but within a sort of safe space. Because what ifs can send you spiraling. We all know this. But in fandom, it kind of allows you to explore that concept within a safe space. So it has this like amazing sort of quality in terms of keeping fandom alive as itself, but it also has this interesting philosophical concept where it allows you to really play with ideas. And that's what I really enjoy about it.
And to an extent, like storytelling historically has always been kind of a way to connect people and to keep heritages going, and, like culture. And it's something that has been, to connect it to something I saw that we'll be talking about, copyright has largely destroyed the ability to do.
But maybe this also goes back to what Heather said, like you try to figure out when fanfic started. And I think most storytelling in a way is derivative. Like no idea is truly original. And you even have classic works like the Odyssey or something that is essentially a fanfic of like Greek mythology or whatever. So I think the idea of taking characters that are known through some form of media or folklore or even religion and placing them in situations, and what Kaylor said, exploring what ifs and different possibilities is actually not that new. It has a very long established tradition. Yeah.
Yeah, I said this to Heather before we started the podcast. Fanfiction is something that only could exist in late stage capitalism, Western world, because the storytelling tradition is building on other people's stories. Like you go back to Shakespeare, and Romeo and Juliet isn't original to Shakespeare. It's someone else's story that that's been taken and built on. And the example I made to her was like the Grimm brothers going around and collecting folk tales. How different is that to someone who's collating a zine? The difference is that copyright, we live in a stage of society where everything has to be monetized, and we even see that with fan fiction to some extent, where people will like put links to like their like coffee or something on AO3, and that can't exist. It has to be taken down. But fan fiction is very much of a time and a place in that sense.
That's true.
So when we all get to dystopia, we'll be able to do whatever we want.
Yay! In the very near future.
We can write our own version where Wynn doesn't get hit by a bus.
There'll just be diseases that he can't cure because there's no medicine left.
No.
Thanks, buddy.
No. Stop thinking ideas.
So we touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to quickly cover this before we move to the next big discussion point. What's the role of fanfic in community building and representation?
I really come back to what Key said, especially thinking about existing as a queer person. I think for and also we had talked about like existing in the margins and on the fringes of community. So I think when you're looking at a lot of the people who are engaging with writing in fandom and fanfic in community, we're people who exist in the margins, whether that be because we're queer, people of color, socioeconomic status, and we're drawn to these universes where, they can either distract us from things going on in our real life, give us representation that
we've been wanting, desiring, can't see in our real lives, and that kind of stuff. So I think thinking of it from that point of view, it allows us to see representation we don't have, create representation we don't have or can't find, create better lives for certain marginalized communities that, you know, are suffering a lot in the real world. So I think it, from my perspective, like just my engagement in fandom and fanfic comes back to a lot of like those kind of things. Yeah.
I know when I was
I think
the worst part of these.
Yep.
I didn't even know who just spoke, so I'm trying to figure out like who to look at.
Go.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it's interesting, fanfiction and community, because it does have this ability to kind of access marginalized groups in the way that you're discussing. But I was thinking about community in terms of like the fandom community itself as well. I feel like it's a discussion that's happening a lot at the minute about how much community is happening in fanfiction. And I always see people sort of harking back to this amazing time where everybody left comments and had conversations in their comments. And I'm like, I feel like we've always had some people who do that and some people who don't, right? Because for some people, fanfiction is something they do to escape. And they're not really looking to be in a community with it. It's something that is very personal to them, and that's all they need out of it. And I think that's fine. And I think the fact that it does create communities where you do have people that want to talk about it and discuss it. And, you know, I have people just turn up in my DMs that are like, so I've read this fic and I need to scream at you about it. And that's amazing. I love it. I love that. Because it does it. I have spoken to people that I would just never have spoken to otherwise. You know, I live in a small town in a small country. I don't get out much, if I'm honest. So,
Same.
Yeah. Fanfiction has opened me up to just like a wider community in general, which is really cool.
Yeah, I agree, because I started writing fic like 3 years ago, and I was bored during the pandemic, as a lot of people were, right? And I published my first fic, like not even knowing what to expect. I had no expectations. And I made friends, exactly like Kayla said, because people approached me because of it. I have a large friend group that I met through my writing. Key and I met, a lot of people here met Key because, you know, we talk about the process of writing our fics, our stories, the ideas that we have. We have a Discord channel all together, you know, just to exchange our ideas and stuff. So I think even from the perspective of a writer, it's just, it opens you up to meet new people, you know, and that's what I really love about it.
When I was a teenager, there were these, again, like before social media even existed, like, you know, fandom had its own like Yahoo groups and forums and things like that. Like we always found ways to communicate with each other, even back to the Star Trek days. Like they had fanzines, they would go to conventions, they would meet up there. Like we always find ways to come back to each other. And I think like with social media being such an easy place to communicate with each other, it's also kind of got its downsides with making it a little too easy to access each other and a little too reactive, because I mean, something like Twitter is fantastic if it's used responsibly, but you've got how quickly it moves, and like it's not the best place for fandom, I think, just because like it's too fast. Like we're, you know, like that was a great episode. When's the next one? Like, okay. All right, why don't we talk about what happened? No, next episode now. You're like, all right, well, I like this character. Yes, next character. Like, and it's what I liked when I was a teenager is they would have these like Big Bangs were a huge fandom event where like you would have like a bunch of writers would sign up and you would get usually there wasn't always a theme, but you would get some kind of like, we're going to write 50,000 words of this pairing or in this fandom. And then a certain number of months would go by and all of them would come out at the same time. And then suddenly the fandom had like 20, 30 like novel length fics to go through, and like in
It was like a feast every time.
and like so when I joined TyBL fandom back in 2020, I was kind of looking for things like that, and they may have existed, but I couldn't find a lot of them. They do exist in Japanese fandom, and I do want to do a very sincere, heartfelt, loving shout out to Japanese fandom, particularly because that is a beautiful place, and they kept the Sodas fandom going for years after Sodas ended. Like 2020, I was engaging very heavily in the Sodas fandom in Japanese because they would do these like they would do events where they were like, hey, you know, this week in July we're going to do like festival oriented Kong art fic. So like, you know, you can do fan fiction, fan art, whatever you want. And based on that, I was like, ooh, I want to do that. And so I started doing them in English. And so the first one I did was in May of 2020, where I was based on Wynn's birthday from Until We Meet Again. And it was just like a week where like every day had 3 prompts and you just sort of picked one and threw out whatever you wanted. And then it just became a thing that I kept doing because I loved the idea of like for Between Us or for Until We Meet Again, it was specifically like Between Us wasn't going to come out for years. Not that we knew that. But it was just a way to like keep us connected to each other instead of just like, I didn't want the only thing for us to be talking about until it came out to be like, I miss them. I miss the series. We have nothing left. Here's another picture of Wynn Team.
Yeah.
I'm so sad. Like, we need something to celebrate. And if we have stuff that we've made, then, you know, we'll at least have that to celebrate and enjoy. So like that kind of community is also something that like we can create ourselves. We don't need canon to help us with that. We can create our own events and we can create our own community. And we can keep that going and keep each other together and sane.
I think actually,
And actually,
oh, sorry.
go on.
No, what he said about you looked for these projects that are very common in other fandoms, and I think that BL fandom in general has a very short shelf life because there is so much new content constantly coming out. And I don't know if you guys feel the same, but I feel like as a fic writer, that's actually a bit of a not a problem, but it's much more difficult to publish something months later because most fandoms have moved on by that time, right? You have other fandoms is like, I know someone talked about Teen Wolf on my timeline this morning, so I'm going to mention it. Like people are still writing.
Don't open that can of worms for me.
In BL, you have a very small core fandom, but the majority moves on very, very fast. And to organize like bigger events with like a lot of writers is very difficult, I feel like. And to gather a larger audience after, I don't know, 4 weeks, 5 maybe, you know?
I feel like it also kind of, this is going more broad, but we come back to like streaming and binge culture with media, which like isn't as much of a thing in BL, but I've seen this a lot, like especially with the rise of like original series being on Netflix. Like they release the entire series, people binge it in one weekend, and then like they're on to the next thing. It's over. And so like I think when things like Teen Wolf were airing and the seasons were 20 episodes long and you got one episode a week and they would take like, you know, breaks in between them as well. Like there was a lot more time spent discussing what was happening in the season, like what we were expecting to come out, and that just like doesn't exist with media in general anymore. And so like the speed in which like one show airs and then we're on to the next thing, it's just like it makes for, I'm sure like you said, fic writing, but also just like the fandom community in general, like he was saying, to take time to discuss and process what we just watched. Like I feel like it doesn't exist anymore in the same way it used to.
And it's a shame because you see fandoms like Our Flag Means Death. I was going to say Meets Death, and I was like, that's different. That's probably a parody series that exists. But like the amount of meta that you see in a series like that. But like a lot of the time, like the so Chris Cinto's new series that hasn't come out yet, X Morning, like the fandom's already got a long wait ahead of us. But like we've already started like picking apart the teaser because like the staff are clearly having a lot of fun with it. So it's an exes to lovers storyline. So like there's a whole bunch of stuff that they put into the background where it's like, don't go back to your ex. That's a terrible idea. Why would you do that? And so like the Twitter account, the official Twitter account, has been posting like, someone on the crew has some feelings about this, and like that's really helpful, not just for marketing, but also for the fandom to be like, ooh, I wonder what this series is going to be about. And like, there have already been some posts of just like, oh, this is exciting. Like, I wonder why they broke up. I wonder why they got together in the first place. Like, what's the story going to be about? Because even though it was like a 4-minute teaser, there's a lot that they didn't answer. And a lot of the time I feel like with TBL, like the stories that we're getting are like kind of very contained and very simple. So it's like, there's not a lot to grab onto and to explore with meta stuff. So it is easier to move on from stories once they're done, because you get everything from the story. You're like, hey, those two fell in love. Good for them. All right, next thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to call BL shows my liquid fanfiction. Like, when I first started watching it, like it was just like fanfiction that I just could drink. Like it was not something that I necessarily really, like you say, it didn't really latch onto it because it was all contained and everything that you kind of needed happened. And Bad Buddy was really the first show where that didn't happen for me, and I got kind of just massively obsessed. Apart from a few like side characters in other shows, but yeah, because it is very contained, and it's nice now to see shows coming out which don't look quite as neat and straight cut, where there are like places to be, and like Be My Favorite was one of them. Like it had all sorts of weird and wonderful twists and turns in it that you can play with. And there are, and Not Me and things like that, there are more of them starting to exist, which is fun.
I think also
I was just gonna say, I think finding those like nooks and crannies in the series, because they are like just basically just, you know, romance novels with a lot less misogyny, but
sometimes.
Sometimes.
These days,
the nooks and crannies where if you look at what people attach themselves to in the different fandoms, and you kind of look at like Kin Porsche and find that, okay, well, a lot more people are writing Vegas Pete, or a lot more people are writing Kim Che, because there's the more space there to play. But even when you've got something like My School President, where you've got Tin Gun, because it's just like this second half of the last year of high school, and it's a self-contained narrative, you've still got so much more you can go on and talk about and look at and explore. The same with like Bad Buddy, where like they do have quite a time jump in Bad Buddy, but A, there's so many questions about that time jump, and then B, there's still so many things that are left unexplored. And that's really, you know, when someone's sitting down and watching a TBL as a series, they might be like, oh, this was rushed, or they skipped over this, or I don't feel like this was fully fleshed out and explained. But that's like where all the little fanfic fishies hang out and be like, oh, I'm going to latch onto this bit and spin my stories. So, yeah.
I think it's interesting too.
I think that was...
When you see which fandoms have like really strong AUs, like I feel like that's a good indication that a series has strong and well-developed characters as well. Because like one of my friends now she's finished it and she's editing it now, but she wrote a Kawi fic, again, like Kawi and Pisang, where she put them into the Witcher universe. And again, it so works so well. Like it's creepy.
It's
like
so
it's
good.
like it's Tabby's read it. Like it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Again, it was another one where I was beta reading on my breaks. It was just like, what was the original show? Like, this is exactly what happened. We absolutely had a sword and fought monsters. This is totally what happened. I also feel like I told her, like as a side thing, I was like, you should totally send this to Chris. I feel like he'd be really happy that like someone like that character and was like, what if he was a badass?
I just want to go back to the community aspect again, just for a moment, because I'm going on over a decade in fic writing now. And it's been across several different fandoms, and through the people that I met, the friends I made, I've been able to travel all around Europe, either just to visit friends or have friends visit me, or had even like creative communes that we had where we just met up for a couple of days in an Airbnb and wrote together. But a lot of those years, yeah, it was really nice. I would recommend it.
Do this.
Do that, guys. Let's do that.
Let's talk about that. But a lot of my time has been spent in RPF fandoms, which I know are controversial, but I still want to talk about it because a lot of those fandoms are very open-ended because you're not confined to a narrative almost at all. Because you're only getting like crumbs of content either through music videos, through social media context. I'm a sports gay at heart, so you get matches and post-match stuff. And I think that has allowed those fandoms to really go on for a long time. And I think something that BL has been doing right now is connecting fandoms of different ships and have the ship be like a continual support and a continual force. And I think that's very interesting for me personally, that someone has recognized this sort of transient nature of fandoms. And then, of course, they're trying to monetize it more. I understand that. But I think it's also helpful for fandom that we are maybe getting continuation of content as well. And we won't have to try so hard to try to keep fandoms alive. Which at this point, I want to just say that Key has done an incredible job doing this. And I think later on we should talk about how to do this, because really Key has been such a driving force in keeping a lot of writers together and keeping writers writing in fandoms. And I think that's an important role in fandom as well.
Oh man,
Key was a huge part in keeping like the Win Team fandom alive for like so many years. Like running the fan events, posting so much fic was always so encouraging to like anyone that was even thinking about writing. And I think that's also like a community that really builds up with fanfic, where Key has adopted so many people. And
what you
basically forces you to like her interests and then throws you into 803.
Thank you for being good hostages.
And that kind of community that you build up, it's been really important for me personally, like and like my journey as a writer and stuff. And yeah, I think it's just one aspect of it all that, yeah, it's just such a critical part of fandom, I think.
It does highlight the importance of having people like this in fandom. Like, for example, you in the Lovecast podcast, what you're doing with trying to get people to settle in and talk about meta and talk about series in a different aspect. Or people like Key, who will organize fan events or keep people together. That's a big part of building a community, not just for fanfic, just as a wider community as well.
Thank you, guys. I'm gonna cry.
Yeah. It's all right. Cry at the end. Cry at the end.
Save your tears, please.
Save your... Yeah.
Heather's actually scheduled a crying moment.
If you don't know anything about me, just know I schedule and organize to the nth degree sometimes. So don't be surprised if like I secretly do have a crying like moment scheduled in
Sessions.
Later on in the discussion.
I actually, very quickly, I wanted to add on to something Yulia was saying, because I also, before TyBL and like quite a few years ago now, I also wrote RPF for a different fandom, and it was like my primary fandom for quite a while. And part of why I stopped is because the internet was getting, like, the fourth wall of the internet used to be quite high, especially if you were writing, right? Like, just especially if you were writing like 10, 15 years ago. And so, like, for me in the past, when I was writing RPF, like, these people were celebrities, so they weren't really like fully fleshed friends of mine. Like, it wasn't like Bob's Burgers, where Tina's writing about her friends and she calls it friend fiction. Bob's Burgers is great, go watch it. But like, so for me, like, it was always like, these are celebrities, they're not real people. And then like, when I had the opportunity to actually like interact with them in person, and then like they became real people, and then it became like less about like, oh, this is fun, if I find out these facts, my fan fiction will be more accurate. And then it became like, now I feel like I'm crossing some boundaries. But funny enough, I was actually talking to Tabby about this like last week, where I was like, yeah, you know, I used to write RPF, but then I got really challenged by the ethical kind of problems with it. And then the next day at the GMMTV showcase, sanctioned Chris Cincto RPF is now that I get to look forward to.
I have waited for years.
And like, not even like, they're not even coy about it either. Like, they came out on stage after the teaser, and Chris was like, so this is about us. It's like, okay, well, all right. So basically, if I write fan fiction for the X Morning, I'm writing Chris Cincto RPF. I guess I don't have any ethical qualms anymore. So I guess now that as soon as I finish the fic I'm writing for the teaser, I've written RPF again. So thank you, GMMTV.
They've welcomed you back.
Full circle.
Dive right in. It's fine.
So we kind of touched on this point as well a little bit beforehand, but let's like expand on it. How has fanfic impacted mainstream BL media?
Can we talk about not me for 50 minutes?
About what?
Can we talk about not me for 50 minutes?
Yeah. I was about to mention it as well.
Specifically,
Crazy. Like, not me is
my favorite. Yeah,
you were talking
it's
about
my
not me,
favorite.
right?
Yeah, I was talking about that.
Yeah.
But my favorite thing is telling people that it's a GOT7 fanfic.
Yes!
It's my favorite show. What? And it's so wild to me to think that someone wrote a Bandom fanfic at some point, and it was turned into a novel, and then Nucci was like, I'm gonna make this a serious, very serious political themes. It's like, how did this happen? I don't know, but it's amazing. I love everything about the history of it. It's so great.
That's actually great.
I think it's not the only case, right? I think there are a lot of
I have a scenario that happened because of fanfiction and BL media in Thailand. Nitty Man.
Yeah.
It had a big scandal because the Thai part of the fandom, or I don't know all the details, but they basically wanted the show cancelled and the author cancelled. They got the book removed from stores because it was based off of a fanfic.
Yeah, GOT7.
I'm pretty sure it was a GOT7 fanfic as well.
It was a lot less. It had less of the serial numbers filed off. Like, the main characters were like Jin and Bomb, as in Jin Young and J Bomb, and there was like a Jack side character who was like very clearly Jackson Wang. So, yeah, that one was a lot more obvious than Not Me, I think.
I think it's interesting.
But even like Kin Porsche, like if we link it to RPF, like whatever we think about those two writers, they were out there like looking at Mile at university and being like, I'm going to write imaginary stories about you. That's, yeah.
Like
Well,
Lotus.
Yeah,
I think the
Kin Porsche origin story is the wildest fandom.
Yeah.
And I will stand by that forever.
well, and of course, like the famous example is like a picture of Cincto going viral, and then Bittersweet deciding, you know what, I'm gonna write a story about that boy, and then she did, and then he showed up to the audition, and then he got. Funny enough, though, I don't know how many people know this. Cincto actually auditioned for the part of Atit, and Chris auditioned for Kongpop. And then they got switched. And so, like, but everything about their whole story is fascinating. So, like, they had fan fiction written about them by mistake, and now it's on purpose. Full circle.
Yeah.
Love a full circle moment.
But maybe that's a point to be made that it's always been present in Thai BL that you've made. So it's always, I think this is important for showrunners because they want to know what people like.
Yeah.
They want to, they don't have to make like big research, a lot of analytics. They can just like look at, okay, this fanfic is popular, this fanfic can be made into a show, and then it's made into a show and we like it, so win-win for everyone.
Which is kind of what they're doing with that new
Yeah.
GMM thing that they announced, right? Where
Yeah.
they're asking
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm wondering if
I
you'll
think
get
that
paid for
alone.
this, honestly.
I was wondering when I
It's
saw that,
such
I was like, I wonder how quickly the people who are going to be submitting our ideas are going to fall into like, so and so couple who look surprisingly like this pairing that I like. 30 minutes every episode for 12 episodes. I think this will sell very well. You're welcome. Signed me. I have not written a proposal for this. No one suspect me when it comes out. Thank you.
I think one of you mentioned in our Discord channel how, for example, Pit Babe is like an example of a fandom trope being introduced. Like, I have not watched the show, but it's a fandom trope, like a megaverse being introduced into a mainstream television show, basically. I don't know who it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very soft core Omegaverse introduction. I mean, normal people who don't know about Omegaverse will not know that that series has Omegaverse in it, basically.
I was kind of... Everyone just talked at once.
Who didn't speak?
We kind of had this discussion in our Discord server when the show finished, and that's what I was kind of saying. It's like a way to introduce like the tropes and common themes in Omegaverse, but put it under the label of like this world with powers and all these terms that aren't exactly Omegaverse terms, but like the people who know Omegaverse obviously know, but the people who aren't as familiar with it just kind of like see it as this like, okay, this is an interesting world building type thing. So it's like a way to introduce people to the tropes without, because Omegaverse is a trope that is, I would say, polarizing in the community. Like, people have very strong feelings about it both ways. So I felt like it was kind of a way to introduce this genre in fanfic and in fandom community while making it, I don't like the word palatable because I don't like the connotations of that word, but making it something that people who aren't familiar with Omegaverse can, I guess, easily digest, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I just imagine all these like poor innocent souls that were watching Pit Babe and just like, this is cute, and
then
searching
they broke
up
out the mama and
Omegaverse just
papa
ending up in all hell.
The funny thing is, Omegaverse has always been fascinating to me because I remember when it started. Like, it, for those who don't know, Omegaverse history 101. So Omegaverse originated on what was called a smut meme for the real life actors Jared and Jensen from the show Supernatural. So this is not something that came from a very wholesome place. This was very much like, well, sick, go. And so like from there, we've created a whole like very complicated, very like nuanced world. And what's interesting is that like you'll see people writing Omegaverse in very intelligent, interesting, fascinating ways. Like that really has more to do with world building than it does about sex. But then you have other people who are like, I am just here for porn, and I find it insulting that you would imply it. And so when I heard that, like,
I can see both sides, honestly.
In general, like some of us are here for plot, some of us aren't, and you know what? Respect on both sides. But like the fact that they're like, I saw it in Japan when I was going through a store. I saw Dojinshi had like Omegaverse, just Omegaverse on as the title. And the first time I saw it, my heart stopped because I'm like, oh, please don't take the worst parts of this. Like there's a way to, like, you have to approach the dangerous poisonous mollusk in a very careful way, and you can have a delicious dish. Otherwise, you'll die. please be careful. And so TyBL is kind of the same now, where I'm like, I know you have this, but I don't know if you're going to do this responsibly or if you're just going to be like, baby fic, which fine, but not my thing. So enjoy.
If you look at Meb, the Thai ebook app, there is a ton of web novels with a megaverse in it.
Yeah.
And I honestly think between a couple of countries, especially Thailand and China, they were kind of eyeing each other off of who was going to be first to the jump for a megaverse. Because Pit Babe was announced well in advance, but I think originally with the Pit Babe announcement, there was another one. No, there was no megaverse.
They said it wasn't gonna.
Yeah. And then
they
China
were distancing
announced
themselves.
2 Omegaverse web series. And suddenly the Omegaverse is back in Pit Babe. And so I think it's especially since like web novels have such kind of a unique place that we don't have an equivalent for in Western media in the way that I guess you could kind of say maybe self-published original fiction, but like the way that like Korea and China and Thailand, they will have their version of web novels. They lean a lot more on those kind of tropes, and that's where we get the proliferation of a megaverse. And there are some really excellent fic. We have like one person here with us who wrote a very, very, very good fic. I think lots of a megaverse, more a megaverse, but it really comes from it's like an Ouroboros of like fandom eating itself. A megaverse comes from fandom, and to fandom it will return.
I do have to say though that I love the fact that fan creators just came up with this concept that has turned into, because there are almost universal rules, it's almost a distinct genre at this point that is now getting mainstream attention. And I love that it came entirely without any monetary motivation or anything, just because some people latched onto it and developed into something so distinct. I just really like that.
I just imagine academics in 100 years' time at university, like, you know, lit 504.
Literally explaining Narnia to people.
Literally a course, a Megaverse 101, a Megaverse 401. It's like a core subject.
I don't want to compare it to Goncharov, but it is kind of Goncharov.
Megaverse Goncharov!
Oh, that's a good idea.
So what?
That has to exist, right? Go to Tumblr. Someone go to Tumblr.
Yeah, it's a Tumblr thing.
AO3 now.
Okay, I was like, I don't understand what that reference was.
So another history lesson. Tumblr basically invented a movie that never existed and like had a great time with it. I live kind of in both worlds at this point because I'm never sure when Twitter is going to die. So I'm just like, I started off on Twitter and then I created a Tumblr years ago, and then so I go back and forth. But basically, Tumblr people were just sort of like, hey, what if we made up a movie? And then they did, and they made up a really complicated, I think it was like Martin Scorsese, right? Like,
yeah.
Like a 19...
It was based off a
movie.
It was based off a picture of something, I can't remember now, but it was a picture of something with a fake movie on it, and the fake movie was Goncharov by Martin Scorsese, and it was just like, this movie doesn't exist, but the joke was kind of like, oh, this guy's never seen Goncharov, and then from that, like out of nowhere, it was kind of crazy.
And that actually, like, Tumblr, part of the reason why I still like Tumblr, even though, you know, fandom is sort of spiraled off into many different platforms at this point, like we used to be very I'll be specific. Like Western fandom specifically used to be like, we kind of migrated from place to place. Like other countries sort of had their own thing, especially Asia. But like the States and Western countries like that, like we had, you know, Yahoo groups, and then we have LiveJournal and the great migration from LiveJournal to Twitter and so on and so on. But like Tumblr, I still feel has that feeling of like fandom in it still, where like, you know, people have tried to make it corporate, and the people using it are like,
they refuse.
Gonna make you regret that.
They refuse.
And like the fact
Yahoo tried the best.
they made a movie that doesn't exist and they still make jokes about it. Like that's kind of at its core, like the whole purpose of fandom is just to be a community and to celebrate something that you all enjoy. And like often it devolves into other things that are unfortunate. But I think part of the reason we get so many negative aspects of fandom is because we're not focusing our energy on like positive aspects of things. We're like complaining about like the things we didn't like in the show, or like I don't know, attacking actors for things, or like, you know, this thing is taking too long or whatever. But instead, like, you know, if we focus on like, hey, what did you like about that? Like, you know, let's focus on like, or what we could do as a group. I sound like a camp counselor, but this is really how I feel.
No, but you're right. Like take the thing that you were
Let's all go
about.
swimming.
Make a long Twitter thread about that you really hated, like take it, turn it into the fix it fic that you want to read. Like, you know, that would be a nicer way to handle it, I guess.
Well, there was this is a kind of side thing, but like I made a tweet at one point where I was trying to kind of get a conversation like this going, where I was like, hey, like, so in Be My Favorite, unfortunately, Pisang never meets Kui's father, who's like a big character and like a huge part of like this character arc. And I always thought it was a shame because like they're both such huge parts of Kui's life, and he never gets to meet like the parent that raised him and means so much to him. So I made a tweet where I was like, hey guys, like, what do you think would happen if they met? And I no hate to this person indeed, but like they quote retweeted and they were like, but they didn't meet. I'm like,
what if?
And they responded and they're like, but they didn't though. Like they didn't meet and did you watch it? And I'm like, okay, I'm deleting this. Never mind.
Just like they're canon pure and they do not play around.
But I think that's also something that's kind of happened with like with queer media particularly, where like I've seen, not so much in TyBL, but I've seen people in other fandoms a little bit complaining that like people aren't really playing with the source material the way we used to. Because it used to be that like no one was gay in anything. So like you were automatically changing canon by making characters a sexuality that wasn't heterosexual. So, but now like we have queer canon, and a lot of people will get very mad at you if you like make a gay character bi, or if you like split up a canon character. God help you. Like if you put Win Team with anyone else, we'll kill you. That is true. Like I was joking before, but that was real.
that was
Something you've notably done twice.
They got back together after, though. I'm allowed. I'm okay. Do as I say.
mean, for what you just mentioned, like for me personally as a writer, this is a big issue because I'm not really. I want everyone to weigh in on that, but I'm not a ship person. I don't like. I don't get attached to concrete ships. I write fic for pairings that I think have an interesting dynamic, and I want to explore that dynamic. And I don't really care if it's necessarily that this was a pairing in fandom. And I think that in BL, that feels like a no-no. It feels like because I'm always a rare pairing person. I always want to. That's where I exist, and I feel like, oh, maybe this will get me sniped. You know, like I get like, oh shit, should I not do this? And I think like it's an interesting aspect of this fandom that it has. Like different fandoms have different rules, but this feels like a rule.
Especially when you have like actors working with different people, and then the fandoms will get very upset if you like the same. Like honestly, I think going back to Not Me, I think a very popular theory that fandom has is that the reason we didn't get Black Graham is because marketing wise, Gunn couldn't be in a relationship with two different actors because of the off-done brand. And like, God knows if it's true, but like it does seem from a marketing perspective, they'd be like, oh no, because then, you know, we have to keep the brand security pure. And so you've got like, you know, within what I love about Not Me fandom though, is that like everyone collectively put up two middle fingers to that and was like, no, Black Graham is canon. I don't know what show you watched. It's the wrong one. You didn't watch the one in our heads, the Gunsharoff version.
If I can just when I mentioned Todd Black, Sink has said in multiple TV interviews, he's like, I played this person as someone in love with Black. He was just like, yes, absolutely, I played Todd as being in love with Black, and I'm like, yeah, I won.
Yes,
I won.
We won.
That is something that's so beautiful about like fandom, though, is that we like, you're not going to give us like Black Graham, fine, Todd Black,
do it
is. Like, we've got it someone else anyway.
You would give us those. We're going to do something even more toxic.
We're gonna celebrate comas. Comas, the love language.
I mean,
love it.
I think it's important though to have like a celebration of things like rare pairs, and to actually like literally and seriously, without murder threats involved. Like, it is important to like explore canon however you want, and like I think we've gotten maybe a little farther away from the. Although I don't want to glorify the past too much, because pairing wars have been a thing as long as fandom has existed. I'm sure there were people back in, long ago ancient China, like throwing rocks at each other over cave drawings that they made. And we're like, how dare you? I drew those two next to each other closer than the other two for a reason. You scratch yours out right now. So, like, I think, but it is something that, like, it is important for people to be able to have creative freedom, as long as they're not doing anything actually harmful to, existing peoples or, demographics. Like, if you're just like, I don't know, I think this character would be cool with this guy. You're not hurting anyone. Calm down.
I think it does go back a little bit to... I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Sorry.
No, I think it does connect to something we said earlier, how... the difference in BL to like a lot of the larger Western fandoms that you have, where it's most of the time a non-canon pairing that gets really popular and people write a lot of fic for it, is that with this, you actually get these stories told in Southeast Asia and in Asia. You actually get the queer-centric story that people are a little bit older waited for so many years. And I think that also creates this stronger, how can I say this, like adherence to the story that was actually told, because the necessity to change isn't really there. But also, I think you mentioned it, Key, the representation that can feel really personal to some people. Like, you might infringe on this, like you might challenge it, and I think that might be a reason why people are very touchy about having their favorite couple broken up in a fanfic or something. That's kind of the way I would attempt to explain it, I guess.
I like that explanation, because you can say like rare pairs and things like that, but I could say, I'm going to write a fic where Dean and Wynn get married, and everyone's going to go, no!
I do... sorry.
I was just going to say, and I think it is that thing where I know in, I can't even remember what episode it was, but like a previous Lovecast episode, you guys were talking about how you feel like as a queer person, you identify more with BL, GL, QL, whatever you want to call it, than the queer Western output of like that's getting made. And I think that can also be a really strong thing with the pairings, where it's like satisfying the need that we have, and so we don't need to be like, okay, well, I'm gonna make Kawi and not have a happy ever after in the sunset. I'm sorry, Keith.
I'm also offended.
Who hurt you? Everything should be allowed except that. My tolerance is dead. Never mind.
I mean, if it's well written, I don't know. You can make it work.
Maybe.
Listen, I nominate Yulia.
Exchange.
Like everything you've said, I've just been like, well,
I could do it.
I could do it.
Taking notes.
In fairness, though, this actually with the RPF fandom that I used to write for, like I actually used to do this thing on my live journal where I would have people give me random pairings of like different singers, and I'd be like, throw it at me. I want to see if I can make it work. And it was fun because it was like an intellectual exercise of just like, and they were short, like they were just sort of like 200, 300 words. And it was just sort of like, you know, oh, these two characters going out for ramen or something. And then, but that was fun. But the thing is, like, I do latch on to these canonical pairings for Thai BL. And I think it's because I had that like deprivation when I was younger in canon things where like, you know, like for example, like something like Boku no Hero Academia, where like Bakugo is my favorite character. I ship him with like 3 people, and it doesn't matter to me at all who he's with. But like with Thai BL, these canon characters that are actually like canonically in love, like for some reason, like I just really latch onto them and like.
No, but they sell them to you very harshly too. Like everything that is done for these shows, all the fan service afterwards, all the extra stuff, all the social media, they sell these couples so harshly to you that you're at a point like it feels so wrong to split them up.
Except if it's the Trinity and then they've got a polycule.
Well, that actually moves us really. I was saying, not the polycule, but the conversation moves us really nicely into, I guess, kind of like our next section, which is controversies and challenges in BL fanfic. So, everyone has mentioned at some point a challenge, but what about like controversy? Oh my god, I can't say that word. Controversies. And challenges as well within BL fanfic.
I have one.
Community and creation. And
Okay. So I made a really, really absolutely lovely friend through Win Team Fanfiction. I think it was 2021. So there were very few of us back then. And so we all tended to see each other around a lot. So in one of my fics, I gave Win a bunch of like original characters to be friends with because he goes abroad and studies abroad at some point. So I figured just based on like friends of mine who are Asian who have studied abroad, a lot of them didn't make friends with like white people. They made friends with people of like different ethnicities. So I was like, okay, so like, yeah. So it was like, okay, so I'm going to have them go to New York. When I lived in New York, it was the same thing. I had friends of different ethnicities. So I gave him black friends. And so I based them on off of friends of mine. And then I had a comment, and I love this comment to this day. All it said was, lol, black people don't talk like that. And I was like, oh, ow. And then I was like, what did I do? So anyway, like, I took a second, and I was like, I am actually genuinely curious what I did wrong. So I responded, and I was like, I would genuinely love to hear your feedback because I want to know how to do it better in the future. So she wrote back, and she wrote like an 8-paragraph thing where she's like, thank you for engaging with this in good faith. I'm sorry that I was a little bit abrupt, but like you have to understand that I don't usually get positive feedback when I comment on people's depiction of black people. And I was like, yeah, I imagine not. So she gave me basically a lot of really fascinating pointers. Like, for example, one of the things that she pointed out is that in my fic, I have this black woman approaching their table because she recognized one of the people there, but she doesn't know the rest of them. And she's like, in Trump's America, no black woman is going to approach a table of people she doesn't know and be like, hi, everyone. And I was like, oh, you know what?
Good point.
Yeah.
True.
Like, I mean, I would do that because I'm me. But like, and the thing is, I was basing her off of a black friend of mine, but I'm basing her off of how she is with me. She trusts me. She knows me. Like, I wasn't thinking in terms, because I don't have that lived experience of being a black person in the United States, especially during Trump's America. So like having this experience of talking to an actual black person about like representation that I had tried to put in my fic, huge point of like learning how to do better. Because, and I left the fic as it was, just as but I left the comment thread as well so that people could like see kind of how this began. So like in the future, when I have And of course, the other thing we spoke about is that I was like, I didn't actually pass this by any Black friends. Like, if I do, published fiction in the future, I will go to Black friends and I'll be like, hey, I'm going to do this for money. I would like to make sure I'm representing these communities well. But I think it's also fair to do it for fan fiction because you are putting it out to potentially millions of people on the internet who are also going to see it. So like, it was one of those things where I was like, it's a silly little fan fiction. I'm going to do my best due diligence by basing it off of people I know. But that wasn't enough. And sure enough, like a Black person read it, engaged with it, and was like, this person is white, I can tell. And they were right.
Yeah.
But I like that you had this experience, that it turned into a learning experience for you, that it was a positive exchange. And I forgot my other point. I'm sorry. What did I want to say? I wanted to say something about representation in fan fiction. I'll get back to it later. I'm sorry.
No. Well,
I do have something to build off that, where I think one of the things that I notice a lot is with some fic is where it's just the characters, but they're not Thai anymore because they are being written by someone who hasn't done any kind of basic research into it. And so it's like these characters are basically white. Like team's not going to get up and like have a bowl of like cornflakes for breakfast or something. Like his favorite food like is not going to be like Papa John's pizza or something. and it's and one of the things like one of my friends is Chinese and she writes for Chinese fandoms, and we were kind of like talking a bit back and forth about some of these things, and she just keeps repeating, and anytime we're talking to people about this issue in Thai BL, she'll be like, they have series set in universities, but their fic is still like American college setting. They literally have the work done for them. I'm like, yeah, that is the case.
On that point, there is a Thai fan who posts on AO3 anonymously. So I can't give you a username, but the name of it, if you want to look it up, is Thai Language and Culture. And at this moment, it has 46,000 words and 20 chapters.
I've used that in the past.
Exactly, yeah. So the reason she created it is that she was like, I'm a Thai person. I've been reading fan fiction in English. And very, very politely, some of you are not getting a lot of very basic things correct. So I'm going to help you by creating documents. And it has been very, very helpful.
I think I remembered my point. Like, I think the difference between traditional publishing and fanfic for me in this regard, when we talk about representation and getting things culturally accurate, is that I think you are more allowed to make mistakes and have the community give you feedback on these mistakes. And I think you can explore it more. I think in traditional publishing, where you have, like your editor looking over it, you have people who check your work, you have a higher diligence or a higher obligation. I still think we absolutely have this as fanfic writers. You should always try to do your research as much as you can, right? You do not necessarily have the resources for it at all times. But maybe goes back to the community aspect. I do love this idea of the community also kind of giving you feedback on these elements, and this turning into a learning experience for both sides. Maybe I really appreciate this element if it happens.
Well, I just think of like way back in the day with like Harry Potter fan fiction, for example. There were Brit pickers. Like there were people who were British who would do like a beta read of people's fic to like make sure that they were like, Harry Potter's not going to go join chess club, kind of thing. So that's where it would get awkward for me, is like a bunch of like white people asking people of color to do this work for them. I know, like, I'll set myself like a 30-minute timer to write, and like 15 minutes of that is like, hang on, I can't write another sentence until I've like got Google Maps Street View of exactly where this is taking place and what the shops in the background are, or like I need to look on Thai real estate to find the exact condo layout and to picture in my mind. I think there's a balance between like people doing that work for you and you know, doing it for yourself. Yeah.
One of the greatest things about actually physically going to Thailand, which is not something that everyone can do, but like when I was actually there, one of the greatest things about it, because I wrote a Yuri on Ice fan fiction years ago where it was about Pichit and Sungil. And just so back to rare pairs, they never speak in canon, and it was 100. And I remember at the time I lived in Japan, and I knew that like I had never been to Thailand. I didn't know anything about Thailand at the time. All I knew was that I liked Pichit the character and Thai food was all I had. But I really liked his character, and I wanted to write this fic about him. So like I kind of did the same thing. I was like looking online, I was looking up like public transportation and whatnot. And I remember what I did to get around it is that I kind of put them into international competitions as much as I possibly could so that I could send them that I did know. And then last year when I went to Thailand for the first time, I was taking copious notes in my head of like everything that I could possibly see of just sort of like day-to-day life of just like I asked one of my Thai friends at one point, I was like, okay, so like if you were living in this area and you wanted to get to this area, how would you do it? And she was like, well, it depends what the weather is. And I was like, ooh, go on. And she's like, well, also it depends what stage of my paycheck I'm at. Because like if I'm at the end of the month, I'm going to take the cheap bus. And I'm like, what's the cheap bus? And she's like, the one without air conditioning. And I said, I beg your fucking pardon? In Thailand? By the window. And I was like, I didn't know about any of it. Because like this stuff is in Thai series if you watch them. But if you haven't been there, because it's not, I mean, that Thai BL series obviously is made for a Thai demographic. So they're going to know all of this stuff. They don't have to explain it. Like in Dark Blue Kiss, I think they're on a bus without air conditioning. And it's just, you know, people will automatically be like, oh, or Cherry Magic, where he takes the boat to work because the boat is the cheapest form of transportation that you can get. And all of this has connotations that you're supposed to, you know, grab onto. And if you're an international audience, you're not necessarily going to pick up the stuff. So if you're writing for a Thai BL series, it's really helpful to have a resource like the one on AO3 by, you know, the Thai fan who's actually very kindly made it, or to just Google excessively everything you possibly can.
It's fun to Google excessively. You end up down these weird rabbit holes and suddenly you're at a family event like confidently discussing these things about Thailand. How do you know these things? No reason. I'm just knowledgeable.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know your child lived in Thailand. They didn't. They know a lot about it. Yes, they do. Let's move on.
Yep.
Something I personally like to do here. Sorry, Heather. Just a second.
No.
Just like 30 seconds.
Go.
Is put in my bottom notes references, like as I would if I was writing an essay, because I feel like you touch on some things that people might not necessarily know, and it's nice to like explore it a little bit and tell people the context. Okay, this is what I wrote. This is why I used this, and I've had really good feedback on that, and I think a lot of people should do this as well.
I never thought to do that. You're so smart. That's genius.
I've done that for the fic about gentrification, for example, where I put like all the references I actually mentioned, put like news articles as references, just so people could read up on it. And like obviously I also didn't have time to study the issue of gentrification in Thailand, but I at least try to connect it to actual things that are happening in Bangkok at the time, and like to share it with the audience, who I would assume is also mostly Western, or at least not Thai, because I think Thai fic is published on different websites. But yeah, that I think that goes back to what I said about like you have a due diligence, or you should, you know, execute it. So yeah, I also like this idea.
that's a with the fic that I mentioned at the very beginning, my sex worker fic AU. That's set in Thailand, but I was very careful not to set it in existing Thailand. I didn't want to make any kind of first of all, like the reason I wrote it in the first place is because like a lot of sex work AUs are very kind of torture porn.
Oh,
Yeah, like angsty, like for it's like, oh, poor tragic, sex worker who like, is tortured into the, and it's just like, I don't know, man. Like, what if we lived in a society where it was just a job? Like, can we please? And again, it's back to like, we make these fics sometimes just to sort of like explore what ifs. And like, so what I decided to do is and I just decided to set it not only in a parallel universe, but also in the future of this parallel universe where there's AI and it's not evil the way it is here. I wrote this fic like 4 years ago, and I was like, "Oh, AI is like a distant thing." I was wrong.
Right.
that news promised me.
Yeah, seriously, I feel very like I let people down. I have like in the fic, I have like basically how it's set up is that like it is Thailand, but like globally, AI has created a better life for people, and like part of that is it's also affected the sex industry, where like some people are just sort of doing like virtual stuff, but other people are just sort of using it to be like independent contractors, and like people have made it corporate, and like it's not regulated, but it's decriminalized. And I wanted to bring more of attention to that aspect of sex work, because a lot of sex workers, if you talk to them, they don't want regulation, they want decriminalization, which is a very different thing, and like puts systems of power in less control of what you're doing with your body. So I wanted to write a fic about that. But that's the other thing, is I didn't want it to be based in today's Thailand, because that sex work industry has had enough written about it and exploited by enough white people. I didn't want to be one of them. I wanted to sort of explore how it could be a good thing for sex workers, and it could be something that like empowers them and makes them happier. And like basically the whole conflict is just the fact that like Win is a sex worker and he's a people pleaser, and so like he takes his job too seriously and he gets emotionally invested in his clients, and then Team comes along and is like, you can be totally invested in me all the time. Yeah, it's 140,000 words in there.
That happens.
But you can also be a sex worker. I really wanted that to be the end of it also, is that it wasn't like he was curing him of his job. It was just sort of like, you need to have a healthy work balance, and you can have that by having sex with me all the time.
Love that. So yes, I'm very conscious of time, so I wanted to just check, did we want to go over the legal and ethical considerations, or would we like to just jump straight to tips and tricks?
Should we vote?
Legal,
like, is everyone
pretty boring?
That's kind of what I'm thinking, yeah. But I mean, if someone else has like something to say, I think we could do something quickly.
I think honestly the only interesting part about legal considerations is why IP owners actually let people write fanfic.
Yeah,
and I think it goes back to what we mentioned earlier, is that they are very aware of the fact that it maintains fandoms and that this maintained interest is monetizable in the long run. I think because we are absolutely infringing on copyright. Like, I know the AO3 likes to say it's
transformative.
It's transformative work, but the threshold for transformativeness is very high, and we're not meeting it most of the time. But yeah, I think the interesting part is really why are IP holders not cracking down on fanfic at all. And I think that it is this community building that we do provide, I'd say, and that they could potentially monetize. Like, you have fandoms like Harry Potter that have existed for 20 years without any new official input. They still exist just based on fan works. So I think,
That being said, I think it's also a PR thing, because
look at Anne Rice.
Around and around the time that the first of the Star Wars prequels came out, George Lucas tried to put out a blanket if you write Star Wars fanfic, I own anything you create.
Yeah.
And started to take people to court for it. And it did not end well and quietly went away. So because the attention and longevity, the positive, the net positive of fanfiction tended to definitely outweigh the what he saw as the negative of it.
Absolutely.
Also, this isn't necessarily legal or copyright associated, but going back to like RPF, one of the funniest things I found about this fandom, because again, like I got out of writing RPF because of ethical concerns. And so in 2020, when I discovered Winteam and Until We Meet Again and Boonprem, I was like, oh, wow. You know, if I were back in my RPF days, but I'm not, so I'm not going to do anything. And then I became a fan in February. And then on Valentine's Day, Boon like came to Twitter and was like, if you have any Boonprem fan fiction, please send it. Thank you. And I was like, stop challenging my very important ethical concerns, Boon. And he continues to do so to this day. So I love him.
Yeah, there was an episode of Off Gun Fun Night where they read an Off Gun fic and involved Arm, if I recall correctly, as well too. Like, yeah, it's a different world.
I think they're very aware of their connection with their fans, though, and they are selling their couple. I think in Thai BL, that is very much a thing that all of the actors are very aware they're doing. And I think probably because of that, they probably do have a slightly different way of thinking about fanfiction.
Well, I mean, Pond, Pooh and June and Dunk like call themselves the Joy Lada Gang, and Joy Lada is the name of the Thai fanfiction site. So
I find it very interesting, like shows like Supernatural who has that very meta episode where they actually have like a whole fanfiction play in the episode
I've ever watched of the show.
Funniest thing.
Yeah. What an episode. That's so unusual.
So it's very interesting, like how they play into it. But I've always been so surprised at how, especially like in K-pop fandoms and stuff, like how the companies don't crack down on the shipping and fanfictions of real members.
I think in this regard, you're dealing more with personality right than intellectual property, right? Which I don't know how it's regulated.
It's a gray area. Honestly.
It's a gray area, really.
One of the things I've really started to appreciate since I got here is that, so I was in Japanese fandoms primarily before this, and like they also played around with like RPF as a selling point. Not as hard as the one I'm in now, but you know, it was an aspect. Like they just, you know, hinted like, oh yeah, we went out for, you know, whatever before, and like we were by ourselves, you know, whatever. The thing I find really interesting is that like Western fans tend to get really, really angry about like shipping culture. But what I also find interesting is that like since I've joined Thai BL fandom, I've made a lot of friends in Southeast Asia who like understand that this is meant to be fun. It's a game. Yeah. It's not meant to be taken seriously. And so like when Chris Singto were being interviewed about like their comeback, you know, Singto's just openly saying, you know, oh, like, you know, for each couple, like our work is scheduled a year in advance. Like, you know, they talk about it as work because it is work. Yeah. And like, of course, there are friendships layered on top of that. But like, you can see it with like fandoms like the Piraya and like fandoms that are older, like the Baby and the Polka, like fandoms that are older, like they have a closer relationship with their fans. And so there is kind of like a teasing wink wink kind of thing to it. Best example for Western fans, I think, is probably like Max Tull, where they're just sort of like, like, hey buddy, want to date me?
Hey,
yeah,
bros.
sure.
Yeah. Okay, bro. Yeah.
Exactly. And so like, I feel like Max Tull definitely played up it in a way that I think Western fans understood that it was a game. But I feel like,
it was so obvious. Yeah,
exactly. But I feel like they don't always understand that like the nuances, like Boonprem, like all the others, like it's not necessarily that they're trying to trick you. They're playing a game with you, and your your obligation to the game is not to take it so seriously that you hire trucks to bother them over.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
The shipping culture itself is not the problem. It is the fans' obligation to be responsible and to play the game the way the rules have told you to play. And so if you're especially if you're an international fan coming into this new, you do kind of have to do some due diligence into like, okay, like in the Philippines, they have decades long culture of love teams, not necessarily queer, but you know, heterosexual love teams. And like my Filipino friends are constantly like, please, for the love of God, do research on this before you get mad that like this is, because this may not be something that your culture has, but it's something that we enjoy. And like you're kind of harshing our buzz when you come in here and tell us we can't do the thing that our culture has been doing for decades.
Yeah.
So write RPF.
Does anyone want to add to the legal and ethical considerations? Chat, comments?
I think that something that I see a lot with like newer writers coming into fandoms is not understanding the fact that a big argument for why fanfic writers don't get sued is that it's free. It kind of that's one of the biggest defenses that like AO3 hinges on. It's the fact that writers aren't profiting off of what they're doing. It's purely for fun. And so then you see people linking coffees and stuff like we heard earlier. And then they wonder why their works are being taken down. And it's because it all relies on this fact that we're doing this for fun, not to get paid.
I think, like you said, with newer people, I think that's just a general tendency online right now to turn creation into content.
Yeah.
You know, you have to monetize your interest because it's possible via, I don't know, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. And we're not doing this. Like we are just churning out like hundreds of thousands of words for free. And maybe for newer people, it is a little bit weird that you would put in all this work and share it and not monetize it in some way. But like you said, obviously the fact that we do not monetize is a big reason why we are allowed to do it.
Yeah. And I think
people see fan art. Sorry, I was going to just say, I think people see fan artists asking for commissions and getting paid for their work. And if you don't know the history of fan fiction and all those legal things that have happened in the past that we are aware of, then they go, well, why can't I do that? Right? Well, they're doing it. Why can't I do it? And I mean, I get that point, but there is a very big divide between fan artists and fan fiction writers.
And I can see because also, you're younger as well, and you're like brand new to fandom, but you're also used to everything being turned into content and everything being hustle culture. And like not just that, but like growing up in a world that is increasingly scarier and like the time is constricted more and more, and you don't have time for fun. You don't have time to do stuff for free. Like, you know, I'm going to spend like 6 hours. One of the funniest conversations I've ever had with another fan. I talked to a Thai fan artist, and she was like, oh, I really liked your fic. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I love your art. And she's like, oh, great. Thank you. And I was like, how long did that take you? And she's like, oh, like 3 hours. And how long did your fic take you? And I'm like, 3 days. And she's like, oh my God. And I'm like, okay, that made me feel bad. Thank you. Not like the idea that you would spend that much time for nothing, like just for people to say, I liked this, and for me to be like, oh, you did great, that's it. Live on for the next 7 years. Like I totally understand.
It's a little bit
also give me money.
It's a little bit like what was being said earlier about how fanfic can only exist in like late stage capitalism.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing where it's like, of course, there's people trying to commercialize it and make money off it so that you can kind of justify spending the time on it.
Right.
Because now you have to kind of monetize your time.
Yeah.
And so
I think also also in a less doomy kind of way. AO3 has the blanket kind of disclaimer in its existence, whereas for the elderly among us who used to post on like LiveJournal and fanfiction.net, you had to post legal disclaimers with your work saying like, I don't own this, I'm not making any money from this. Whereas that practice fell away because AO3's existence is kind of that disclaimer. And so as the practice fell away, like the knowledge of the need for that also fell away.
I remember telling my father when we were still speaking, we were talking. He's always been quite proud of the fact that I write fanfiction because, you know, back when we lived in the same home, I couldn't really hide what I was doing. But he's a writer himself, and so he was quite proud of the fact that like his daughter had started doing something that, you know, was similar. But I remember at one point I told him, I was like, oh, like I'm getting close to 1 million words that I've written, and like that's a really big milestone. And he basically, not cruelly, but he was basically like, God, like you could have written so many books by now, and you could have like published so many books by now. And I was like, I know, but I don't need to. Like, I think that's ultimately, like, I've made so many more, like, friends and emotional memories, and, like, I love what I do. Like, I love writing fan fiction, and, like, I am writing a book, and if I publish it, then, you know, that's fantastic, but I see the commercial work that I'm writing very differently from the fan fiction I'm writing. Like, everything you write for traditional publishing or for, you know, like a job for money, that has very different requirements and genre needs, and just in general, it's just a very different animal. And I feel like one of the nice things that we get as fan fiction writers is absolute freedom, for good or for bad, but we basically get to do anything we want. We could write a whole fic where they just snuggle in bed for 10,000 words, and it's the best thing you've ever had. You can hit win with a bus twice.
Yeah, I had a friend tell me recently, because they come from a creative background, but they are doing that as their job, and they started writing fanfiction for the first time, and they said it was so difficult because it's so indulgent. Like fanfiction as a medium is completely indulgent to your whims. You can do whatever you want with them in a way that you can't when it is commercial.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful, is it's an art form just for itself. It exists for no other reason.
Exactly. It's just like, and the fact that we can come up with things like Omegaverse, where it was created in a fan community forum, and like it was just sort of like, hey, you know what I'd like to read? No, buddy, what do you want to read? I want to read Wolf Dick. Well, I'll make that for you. Yay! And then we have a whole culture built up around. Like, honestly, I think, and I've heard so many people use this as an argument for universal basic income. Fan fiction is the proof that people who like don't have to worry about like the money to survive won't just sit around and do nothing. We will create art. We will do things. We will create communities. This is who we are as a species. We're not going to just sit on a couch and stare at a TV. We like instinctively want to create. We want to do things. We want to learn things. Like this is what we are as people. And so like fandom in that sense and fan fiction is just such a beautiful mirror or window of who we are.
Please make this a closing word.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's beautiful, because I was just going to go right into like what makes fanfic fun and why do you think it continues to fuel fandom?
We can do that.
That was perfect.
I'm very passionate about this.
Well, yeah, all right. Well, then what makes fanfic fun? What makes fanfic fun for you?
It's this freedom we talked about. Like you can write absolutely everything you want. I think honestly, for me, the backbone of fanfic writing are these people who write incredibly long stories that have very little engagement, and they push through, and they publish their 200,000 word fic that has like 5 comments because they have one person commenting every few weeks, and they still do it just because they love it. Like you said, you get very little from it. The greatest thing you can get is like a positive feedback, someone messaging you or tagging you on Twitter or something saying, oh, I read your story, it really touched me. Like that is what you might get out of it, but you're really doing it for the love of the story, for the love of the act of writing itself. And yeah, that's what I really love about it. And the fact that so many different people do it, enjoy it, come together because of it. Yeah.
in the sense that like it's something that we do just for community, especially back in January, Tabby and I started a thing where we're sending like fic back and forth to each other that we've handwritten. Just because like me and another friend are doing like pen pal letters back and forth because we kind of miss that tradition of like writing letters to each other where you're just like, you know, you have like a tangible proof of like your friendship with someone. And so like where is it? Anyway, well, I can't find it. Anyway, Tabby's like it is beautifully displayed somewhere in my room, but it is very messy. But basically like this idea that like you make friends through this and you create like I keep talking about community, but that's really what it is for me. It's like it's all I want from this. Like it's why comments are such a big deal to a lot of us as well. It's because, you know, we don't really want to post to avoid. There is love in just writing, but it is, you know, like I said earlier, it's something that like humans have done for time immemorial, just like to communicate and connect with each other. And so like when people leave a comment, even if it's just I loved this, that's why we like getting comments that are just simple like that, because it's like it touched someone's heart and they've actually taken the time to tell you. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, like just an emoji heart or anything, like just knowing that you're there and that, you know, you liked what we made. That's everything to a person telling a story. Like we just want to see faces around a fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think I probably wouldn't have ever continued writing fanfiction if I hadn't had the engagement that I did from the community. You know, I might have wrote a couple and then stopped. It was really that connection that you were able to build with people and the feedback and the discussions around things that keeps me writing. You know, because I enjoy writing. It is an intellectual exercise. It is fun. It's trying to find the perfect phrase is both frustrating and like also gratifying when you do it. But it is that connection and engagement. And I find it like when I do see people sort of saying, oh, well, why do writers always want comments? We don't have to give those things to you. And it's like, well, no, you don't have to. But it's nice, isn't it? Like, isn't it nice to tell an author that you really enjoyed their work? Like, because I love giving comments. I never feel like I give nice enough comments. Like, I always want to be that person that can just like throw everything down and create these amazing comments, but I don't. I'm really, really bad at giving comments, but I do try because I think it's important to let that author know that, hey, I read this and it was great. Thank you.
If you want more fic in any fandom that you've ever been in, show love to the people who create things, because like I started writing fic when I was 9. I started posting it around the same time. And, you know, of course at 9, I was incredible and I was writing the best ever written. And even in spite of it being maybe not as incredible as it is now, people were shockingly nice to me when I was posting on fanfiction.net. People were like, oh, I can't wait to see what happens next. Like, again, how many times do you sit in your room by yourself and tell a full-fledged story to the wall? You don't. You're telling it to people. And so, like, you know, for people who don't want to comment on fics, please imagine that you're sitting in front of a room full of people who are staring at you and none of them say anything when you finish your story. Understand that's how we feel when we post a fic and no one says anything.
But also writing is so personal, isn't it? Like, I think a lot of us have this experience where we're writing and halfway through you figure out, oh, I am exposing much more of myself than I thought I would. You're figuring out something about yourself and you're sharing this with other people. And it's so important when someone goes, oh, I saw you. I saw what you were trying to say. I relate to this. And you captured this for me. And that's the most beautiful part, I think. Like that's that connection.
I always find it really interesting.
Been a little bit I was just gonna say it's just a little bit therapeutic for me. Like I always write when I'm not doing well because the expression, getting feelings down on a paper, it helps me.
I like Laura told me about a comment she got on her coffee shop AU that I thought was really beautiful. Go ahead.
Lord, say it.
I thought if you want to, but like I thought it was really sweet because like we like a lot of the like when I posted news, like I got so many beautiful comments from people, and I'm still incredibly grateful anytime anyone shows any fic the time of day, especially older fics, because there is no time limit on when you can leave a comment on anything. Like in fact,
that's also true.
Yeah, if
I
you
think
leave
this is also the social media environment where it's like, oh, if I comment on a picture that's like 3 months old, that's cringe. But like, you comment on my fic that's 2 years old, that's not cringe at all. Please comment. It makes my day, literally, if you take the time to read an old story and take the time to actually express your thoughts about it. It's just the greatest thing ever.
And like there can't be any like what you enjoyed about it is usually what we want to hear most. Like if like you have, it can be as funny enough, the simplest comment you can leave is the one most of us want most. And it's the one where you just copy and paste parts that you liked. And the most common thing I see in my comment section is when people are like, I could copy and paste the parts I like, but it would be the whole comment box. I'm like, good.
Let's do it.
Because like,
I mean, my
comments like that.
I love those. Yeah.
Because then you like that was actually how I learned when I was, you know, a very young teenager. When I was writing, people would copy and paste the parts that they liked, and I learned from that. Oh, if I write more like that, because not everything I was writing was, you know, working well. But like people were, you know, naturally just picking out the parts that they liked. And that's how I learned how to write better, is that I was like, ooh, okay. So like you're actually helping someone improve their craft by doing that. Not by criticizing them, not by criticizing them. Don't do that.
No, but just to add on to that as well, I'm always interested in the ones that often that they highlight are the things that I was least happy with. Or like a part that I've worked on for ages. And and they highlight and I'm like, oh, okay. It worked.
It's always so interesting what people actually gravitate to at the end of the day. Like you have these lines where you're like, oh, I really did something there, and no one talks about it. And then you have a throwaway line where a lot of people really feel it and they tell you, and you're like, that's really interesting, because they reflect on your writing a lot, you know, very differently than you do yourself. And I always find that incredibly interesting to see when someone takes the time to actually tell you the parts that resonated with them and that touched them a lot. I just find it very interesting. And like you said, it really helps you develop as a writer as well. Yeah.
It's especially funny when it's like a line that you added right before you posted it, where you're like, "Oh, I'll just add something."
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
So you're like, good thing I added that. And like, I imagine that like when you're reading something that like I know there's a fic that I'm reading now for a different fandom that like I downloaded to my phone. This is another point. I see a lot of people complaining that there's no AO3 app. The reason for that is, well, look into it. But basically, there are a lot of things that we wouldn't be able to allow if it were on an app controlled by, you know, exactly. So like, but what you can do is you can go up to AO3's little search bar and you can download it as an EPUB, and then you can open it on your phone as a little ebook. So please do that instead. It looks very nice. So I have one of these on my phone, and it's fascinating because like I know this fanfiction author has a published book that I'm obsessed with, and it's fascinating to see like how their unedited, untraditionally published edited fic works, and like it's not as polished, but it has that indulgence and that freedom of it, and it's just and you can kind of see like yourself in it, because you're like, oh yeah, that's how I would probably do that as well. Like there's a rhythm to fan fiction writing where you're like italicized O.
I would actually consider fanfic almost a genre of itself at this point, where like certain writing conventions that are so distinct to fanfiction that you will never see in traditional publishing, because your editor would probably be like, no, you can't write like that. That's not grammatically correct. This is not like proper English or whatever. But it is so prevalent in fanfic that I think it's almost a genre convention at this point, which again goes back to, you know, people just creating this entire microcosm almost just out of love, which is so beautiful. Yeah.
I remember I got into a fight with my high school English teacher because I was physically, no. But I wrote all of my creative writing in present tense because that's how all the fan fiction I read was written. So I just naturally started doing the same thing, and I was writing fan fiction at the same time, obviously in high school. So I remember my English teacher of like 50 something years old, like he just went on a rant about present tense and how he hated it because he's like, it's just so unnecessary. Like, oh yeah, I'm doing flashy present tense. And I'm like, we are all such nerds. Oh, we have tense preferences. But like, I remember my biggest win in that class is that we had to write a portfolio of short stories for the end of the year. And I wrote one of them in present tense to prove him wrong. And I did. He actually wrote a note where he was like, all right, fine. Like, that's literally what it was. And I was like,
Great.
I can leave high school a star now. I won against my English teacher. And he was a lovely person, but like that was his pet peeve. And I just learned that, you know, you can use it in a way that matters through fan fiction.
Alrighty.
Trying really hard not to be nerdy about tenses, sorry.
I feel like that's a full like 30-minute conversation that completely
that's why I'm
happened. Is
just
like
like-
your preferences in
doing
fanfic, and maybe that's a part 2.
And just like the way that tense changes immediacy, and I'm not doing it. Mm-mm.
We can do some Twitter space about this if you want.
Thank you.
A follow-on from the episode.
Leave a comment below if you want to
Well, I
hear us
feel
talk for 30 minutes about tenses.
There you go. There you go. I feel like this is a really nice natural end to the conversation. Time to kind of wrap up the episode. And with that, our episode about fan fiction comes to an end. So thank you for joining us, Kayla, Key, Yulia, Tabby, Laura, and B. We've already said, but there's so much more that we can talk about, but unfortunately we're out of time. But like Key said, everyone leave some comments if you want more discussions on fanfic, if you want a Twitter space, if you want another episode. A part 2 could be coming. We'll see. I guess it depends on if we've got like another 2 hours to talk. And I'm pretty sure we've got the content to talk, so we're just gonna find the time. So for everyone watching and listening, please share your thoughts with us in the comments of this video or add us on social, Lovecast Podcast. We'd also love to know what fics you're currently enjoying. Are you enjoying any fics by our authors here or extra other fics? Like, leave them all in the comments. We want to share. We love sharing on Lovecast, and I feel like fan fiction is literally a sharing community. So please share all of the fics that you love with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. And while you're at it, again, share the episode with your friends. Sharing is caring. That is literally what I'm saying here. Sharing is caring, so please share it all with us. Thanks for joining us this week, guys, and we hope to see you again soon. So until then, a very big goodbye from all of us here at Lovecast and in the fanfic community.
Bye-bye.